Eco-radicalism and bourgeois politics. For international socialist planning, not capitalist plunder. As a rule, political parties, groups, movements, and prominent individuals can be located and often locate themselves along a left-right spectrum. However, the environmentalist movement in the U.S. seems to defy obvious placement along a left-right axis. Depending on how one selects the evidence, it can be demonstrated that the environmentalist movement is a radically leftist opposition to capitalism, or, alternately, a current in the very mainstream of American bourgeois politics. One of the prominent figures in the movement is Barry Commoner, who considers himself a socialist, occasionally cites Marx for authority, and advocates global economic planning. Self-styled eco-Marxists put out a journal called Capitalism, Nature, Socialism. At farm workers' rallies in California, one will see contingents from the Green Party. Kirkpatrick Sale, author of The Only Good History of the New Left, SDS, Students for a Democratic Society, maintained some years ago that the American radical left was just as strong as it had been in the 1960s, only now it was embodied in the environmentalist movement. This view is mirrored by the movement's right-wing opponents. A former Republican governor of Washington describes environmentalism as, quote, anti-business, anti-established institutions, and above all, anti-capitalism. Shortly after Ronald Reagan became president in 1981, a conference of the right-wing Young Americans for Freedom chanted, "Nuke the whales," to express their intense hostility to the Greens, whom they viewed as far more significant opponents on the campuses than the Reds. Yet one can present other evidence to paint a totally different picture. Among the many corporate contributors to the Audubon Society, a mainstream environmentalist organization, are Chevron, General Electric, IBM, DuPont, J.P. Morgan. There is a large government bureaucracy which administers a multitude of laws and regulations protecting the environment. Reagan's successor, George Bush, who no one would accuse of being anti-capitalist, dubbed himself the environmental president. And shortly before his election as vice president in 1992, Democrat Al Gore published a book titled Earth in the Balance, Ecology and the Human Spirit. How does one explain a movement which encompasses both self-described anarchists and Marxists and the vice president of the most powerful imperialist country in the world? People in the environmentalist movement would answer that it has two wings, a moderate, a reformist wing represented by organizations like the Audubon Society, and a radical wing. The people in it call themselves deep ecologists, represented by Earth First. Chevron and J.P. Morgan are not going to contribute tens of thousands of dollars to Earth First. As Marxists, dialectical materialists, we stand in fundamental political opposition to both wings of the environmentalist movement. Capitalist governments will never sacrifice profits of large corporations and banks to protect the environment, no matter how piously they pay lip service to it. And the economic primitivism preached by the green radicals is both reactionary and utopian. Control over major ecological problems such as air and water pollution can be achieved only within the framework of an internationally planned socialist economy. This in turn requires workers' revolutions to take the factories, transport systems, oil fields, mines, and other means of production from the privately owned and profit-maximizing corporations and banks which now dominate the world economy. The two faces of bourgeois ideology. A major factor underlying the ideological confusion generated by the environmentalist movement is that green radicals identify capitalism as such with what they call consumerism and a belief in a limitless expansion of material wealth through scientific and technological innovation. But such a view of capitalism is profoundly false because it is one-sided, analogous to regarding only the Republican Party as a party of big business in the U.S. To begin with, The equation of capitalist ideology with consumerism and the worship of technological progress disregards religion. If you see a guy on Wall Street carrying a sign saying, "God will punish New York and Babylon, the Babylon of the modern world," you would not conclude that he is a radical leftist opponent of capitalism. On the other hand, he is not likely to be a public relations man for the Federal Reserve System or Merrill Lynch, though these days you never know. Green radicalism implicitly denies that Christianity is a central ideological pillar of the Western bourgeois order, that the churches, both Catholic and Protestant, are institutions in their own way just as crucial in present-day America and Europe as stock exchanges and advertising agencies. Recall that the main bourgeois party in Europe's most powerful capitalist state, Germany, calls itself Christian democracy. The Polish Pope, Pope John Paul Wojtyla, played a key role in the capitalist counter-revolution in East Europe. Yet in 1995 papal encyclical, Wojtyla denounced the powerful cultural, economic, and political currents which encourage an idea of society excessively concerned with efficiency. The same encyclical attacks the reckless tampering with the world's ecological balance. As we shall see, radical environmentalism as an ideology has a quasi-religious characteristic, sharing certain basic premises with Christian doctrine. But even if we consider secular bourgeois economic doctrines, these do not all promise a boundless cornucopia of material wealth. At the very beginning of the history of industrial capitalism in England and Scotland in the late 18th century, two different, in a sense alternative, currents of bourgeois economic ideology emerged, the one optimistic, the other pessimistic. Adam Smith maintained that capitalist entrepreneurs, spurred by market competition, would steadily increase the wealth of nations through technological innovation. However, 20 years later, Thomas Malthus, a minister of the Church of England, the state church, argued that the large majority of mankind is condemned to perpetual poverty because of the naturally limited supply of agricultural land. He wrote, "The power of population is indefinitely greater than the power in the earth to produce subsistence for man." Over the next 2 centuries, depending upon economic and political conditions, optimistic forms of bourgeois economic ideology have been ascendant at some times, pessimistic doctrines promoted and widely accepted at others. The growth of significant environmentalists movement in the U.S. in the 1970s was linked to a shift in the dominant bourgeois ideology, especially among liberals, from Keynesianism to energy Malthusianism. A seminal document of this movement, the 1972 Blueprints for Survival, states, "Indefinite growth of whatever type cannot be sustained by finite resources. This is the nub of the environmental predicament." Leon Trotsky once pointed out that revolutionary politics does not consist in putting a minus wherever the bourgeoisie puts a plus, and vice versa. And especially when it comes to environmental issues, the bourgeoisie is often divided, nor do we determine our position in response to those of other political tendencies, whether of the far right or the far left. We determine our positions on all questions by the objective, and I emphasize objective, interests of the proletarian revolution as a necessary transition to communism. We judge environmental issues and the conflicts on the objective merits of the concrete case. When environmentalist groups are raising a hue and cry, a corporation is dumping toxic waste in a residential area, they may well be exposing a capitalist crime against public health. On the other hand, when millionaire homeowners oppose additional residential construction in their neighborhood in the name of protecting the environment they're protecting is one in which their children will go to school only with the children of other white millionaires. It is also important to stress that opposition on environmental issues is necessarily governed not only by our political principles, but also scientific and technical knowledge.